Receiving audio transmission now.
Orders, Commander.
How many times must I tell you? Mind the nerdish cap! We all...
Once again to Mind the Nerdish Gap. Okay. All right. So today we have some exciting questions again from Dante to kick us off.
Yeah. So I wanted to start off today's show by asking you, what is the longest or darkest YouTube rabbit hole you found yourself watching or going down?
Oh, interesting. Probably should have spent more time thinking about this since I had your questions. Not necessarily connected to just one story, but a few years ago I found, that there's so many of the short films, and well, I guess it is kind of connected, at least to one theme. I went down the alien rabbit hole. So there's tons and tons of short little movies with the alien theme, and I think for like a month I was just like almost every day I was watching one or the other, or everything like that, just get excited until finally the quality started to deteriorate to the point it was like, oh never mind, I'll move on.
Yeah.
So how about you? What's the
I can feel that. So mine I feel like probably just the rabbit hole I've gone down that has the capability of like being the longest, or like not really having an ending, was the Backrooms.
Right.
So and the main reason I say that is because like the levels, so like there's different levels to the Backrooms, of course, right? Like, the standard that everyone knows about is like the yellow walls, like fluorescent lights with the buzzing and everything. But like the maximum like amount of Backrooms levels that there can supposedly be is the maximum 64-bit integer, which is like
interesting.
Like it's just a ridiculous number. Like it's in like the quadrillions or something like that. So it's like, especially since there's so many different videos that are like the found footage of like different Backrooms levels, like it just because of that number alone, it allows for like just any number, just like infinitely, basically, of like these found footages to be made, or of like Backrooms related content, because there's just so many levels that like it feels like the platform could never run out of content for it, right? And you kind of have other like horror niche communities like that, kind of like creepypasta, for example. And with creepypasta, it's like just fully unlimited, like there's not really a set number to it, but just the fact that the Backrooms has a set number, but that number is just so out of the realm of where we could feasibly reach that number, that it's like, I feel like that's probably the longest rabbit hole that I could just keep on going down. But just like with your alien thing, there's definitely like, you have your really high quality and nice Backrooms videos, but then you have your Backrooms videos that are like literally like 10-year-old Timmy walking around his backyard and like acting like he's in a horror movie, right? Like that's like the kind of difference of like quality scaling there. So it's funny that you mentioned like some of them. I feel like that's with like all of these different rabbit hole niches, where it's like some of them really work, and then some of them are just like, why did I just watch that?
I can't get that time back now.
Exactly. Then my second question for you for today was, what is your favorite horror icon? So, for example, like Jason Voorhees or Freddy Krueger, or like from Hellraiser, the Cenobites.
Right.
What would be your favorite like iconic figure? from a
So,
horror.
and that's a real hard one because I really love Freddy Krueger because he, it depends on which film you watch, of course, but in most of his films, how he just seems so aware and so self-aware. But then there's the juxtaposition of someone like Michael Myers, who's just an entity, right?
Yeah.
And just seems to just go by, like purely like a shark type function, just kill, and just killing and killing. But I think I like the awareness more. But then I'd see it. I'm the worst because then you throw in the Cenobites, where they have like the self-awareness, but they seem to be kind of on autopilot as far as killing most of the time. And it's like, you opened it, you die.
Exactly, yeah. Like it's just the function of what happens here.
But I did like how they did with the latest one. I actually enjoyed the new Hellraiser reboot, where she kind of put her on a path, and every time she started to go off the path, it's like, you understand, at the end of this process, either you come along or you give us, alternatives, but I'm not going to let you just somehow avoid this. So I'm going to keep popping up reminding you, and I'm going to just keep taking alternatives until you choose one, which was kind of interesting, right? It's like, if you don't choose, I'm going to keep choosing for you, but because you didn't choose, I'm going to keep choosing for you. Until you choose, then we're going to keep this process going, right? So I thought that was, I really enjoyed that. So it's hard, but I think ultimately, I think might be partly because I think out of all of them, the Hellraiser I thought did an excellent reboot and has potential to grow from there. Freddy Krueger you really can't do without Robert Englund, even though he thinks Kevin Bacon would be a great replacement for him.
Really?
Yeah. So apparently, in interviews he said he has no interest in doing Freddy Krueger anymore, and he's just, his body's not aged well and can't do any of the stuff and things like that. But he really thought Kevin Bacon should be his heir apparent, right? Instead of Haley Joel Osment, who did it, and it did not work out. But he really felt Kevin Bacon. And I thought, that could possibly work. But I think it's more than just getting the right actor in the role. I think the writers never, especially when they did the reboot, they clearly didn't understand what Wes Craven was trying to do. So the reboot really missed the mark, and that's my fear. Whereas it felt like the Hellraiser reboot, they did a good enough job that they understood what the intent was, and for the most part did a good job with that. But one you didn't mention was actually, which I know it's kind of borderline, but the Predator. And I thought the Predator reboot did a really good job too. So it does give me some hope that you can go back to some of these iconic ones and potentially do it right. I really think, the Halloween reboot, the first one I really enjoyed. It went so fast downhill for the second and third. As like, you lost me.
Like, I think part of the issue, to be honest, because like my favorite icon is Michael Myers.
Yeah.
And I think that honestly part of the issue that they ran into with the reboots is like, you can only take the initial idea of what Michael Myers was so far, right? Like, because in the original movie, like in the, I think it was 1978 movie, he wasn't even, like, you may have heard him referred to as Michael every now and then, but he wasn't, like, even in the credits, he wasn't referred to as Michael Myers. He was just the Shape.
Right.
And I think that is, like, a really, really, like, I almost would say that, like, I don't like Michael Myers as a horror icon. I like the Shape. As a horror icon, like the idea of
there's
like
just like this force or whatever,
this force or this entity that takes the shape of like a human man that is just relentlessly killing people. And like, we don't know if it goes any deeper than, is he just a man that's fucking crazy? Is it actually like some sort of like dark force entity that's like, got some sort of like, malicious intent and like reason behind all of the killings it's doing. Like, I just really like the aura of mystery to it that even just the name The Shape brings right? Where it's like, the Shape could be basically anything to anybody that has a malicious enough intent to like try to kill you, or like
to manifest,
especially since like, all of the all of the victims that Michael has for the most part are people that don't have any kind of back knowledge to who Michael Myers is.
Right, quite
Like, it's
often,
just
yeah.
people that are just encountering this thing
Mhm.
that's like, what the fuck? Like, there's just this random guy that's
Force,
trying
yeah.
to kill me, this random shape of a
Mhm.
guy, and I really, really like that concept. But yeah, that's basically my favorite horror icon. But it's a really hard choice
It
because there's
is.
just
It
so
really
many
is hard.
good ones.
Well, and I think the for me that makes it the hardest is I have to look at it through the lens of can they do new content with it, continuing it, or if
Mhm.
it's done, you know. But that does bring me into the next my first question. So, who's your favorite horror content creator?
Yeah, so my favorite content creator, if we're talking YouTube, I'd have to say Dead Meat or James A. Janice. I don't know if you've heard of him, but it's just a great channel that like goes. They do like the kill count videos for
I
like
have seen those.
tons of different horror movies.
Right.
Yeah, and like I really like the fact that it's not just going through the movie and counting all of the kills and like saying which ones are best or whatever, but it's also like going into the production of the film and like talking about like, oh, this actor's from this as well, this director also did this, and like this is how this applied into this film that they made here. And I really like that format of like just doing a deep dive that while it is like kills of the movie centric, it still covers like a lot of the other tidbits of information that horror fans would want to know out of watching a movie like that. But then for film specifically, I kind of looked at like what is a name that I feel like I've seen constantly through like movies that I've just enjoyed in horror, and I think it's Sam Raimi.
Oh,
honestly,
okay. All right.
I think that his name is probably the one that I've seen the most across like films that I've all enjoyed. And that's not to say, you know, all credit goes to Sam Raimi for those movies, but just that like he's been the common trend across a lot of movies that I've enjoyed that are horror. You know, especially the Evil Dead movies.
Right, I was gonna say that's another icon.
Yeah,
and yeah, and Ash from Evil Dead and all that too. So, for me, so I guess YouTube content is probably Chris Stuckman. I don't know if you ever watched his, but he does some really good reviews and stuff like that. Gets Stuckmanized. But he also is a filmmaker, and I think that that mindset of being able to review horror films but know what goes into them and kind of talk to that level. So I think sort of what you were talking about, that really intrigues me. I'm not necessarily a big behind the scenes person, but I like that some of the technology or technical parts of it when it's discussed. I don't necessarily want to see the behind the scenes, but I don't mind talking about sometimes the behind the scenes. So I really like his stuff. But as far as just, you know, overall content in the horror genre, it's got to be Clive Barker, and he's the one that, you know, created Hellraiser and everything like that. But even when I was in high school, I started reading his stuff, Hellbound Heart and all that things, and his stories, between his short stories and his massive novels and things like that. He's still one of the ones that's had the most impact mentally to me for the horror genre and everything like that.
Very cool.
So speaking of the genre, though, again, what's your all-time favorite horror film?
Man, and like this is a hard one too, but so I picked an animated one and I picked a live action one.
Oh, interesting.
I feel like my favorite all-time like animated horror film would have to be Mad God. So I've talked a little bit about this one with you, but this movie is just insane. So it's like, for the most part, I would say like 80 to 90% of the movie is claymation.
Oh,
and
wow.
It is so well done. Like, it is probably like, it's one of those movies that doesn't have it has a plot that is up for interpretation.
Okay.
Right? Like, after you watch the movie, you kind of come up with like what you think is going on in it. And I forgot how long it was said that this movie had been like in production, but I think it was close to something like 30 years.
Wow.
Because the main like driving art force behind it is the same guy. I'm totally blanking on his name. I should have written it down, because credits to him. But it's the same guy that did like some of the special effects work for like some of the Star Wars movies.
Oh.
So like he did specifically the work for the AT-ATs in Empire Strikes
Oh, the
Back.
model we work and everything.
Yeah.
Okay.
So he did all the work on that stuff, and I'm pretty sure that this movie had been in production since then. So like it's been such a long time that this has been
So it's like
worked
a
on,
passion
and
project type
yeah,
thing.
it's
Okay.
like his magnum opus basically.
Oh wow.
And it's so good. Like just visually, some of the things that are in that movie is just it's just like horror eye candy. Like it's just
Wow.
so good. But yeah, so that's my animated choice. And then for live action, I went with the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Mainly because that was one of those movies that, similar to the first Terrifier, like I was talking about in our last episode, it just left me so shell shocked, and it just like it was one of those movies that like I like I didn't feel okay after watching that. Like it just felt so demented and so like that same sort of idea of like a grungy realism to it that like made it just hit that much harder of like that is some real horror. Like
it felt like real that you were seeing.
Exactly. Like and like with a lot of horror movies, you try to kind of put it through the lens of like, oh well, if I was in this situation, I'd do this. And with that movie, of course, you have some characters making some, dumb decisions and stuff.
Right.
But it's another one of those good examples of movies where it's like, there's certain scenarios that you get shown where it's like, even if I was in this scenario, I wouldn't know what to do. I wouldn't know like how to escape.
What would be the best choice?
Exactly. Yeah. I wouldn't know what the best choice is here.
Right.
And I feel like horror movies that do that are quite unique because
instead of relying on something stupid,
exactly like it puts the character in a position that it's like, I'm trying to sit here and equate all of the best things that this character could do right now. I can't think of anything, so we're just fucked, man. Like, it's like
game over, man.
Yeah, and it's like that feeling. I feel like that's such a good feeling to communicate in specifically horror because it's like that's kind of what horror is about. Is like being in a scenario where like it's just unknown. You don't know what to do. It is pure panic mode, right?
Right.
I feel like that's a really good example of that. And I kind of wanted to just bring light onto that quality of that film. Because again, this is just another really hard question. Like, I feel like I have so many favorite horror movies, right?
Right. Mine is definitely going to be John Carpenter's The Thing. I think it has some of those things like you talked about, like that factor of what is the right choice. But I think a big factor too, which you and I have discussed before, that unknown. They didn't know what it was. They didn't know who it was.
Yeah.
So you had all that paranoia and all that. And then they finally come up with theoretically a plan to figure out a way to weed it out and everything. And that goes completely astray. And still by the end, you still didn't know. You still didn't know if our hero was really the hero, if the other survivor was really the alien or what, So there's so many discussions and theories on it, and unfortunately, I think it got injustice because it came out same time as ET. But at any rate, I still think it's one of the best. Just that, like you said, that no matter what choice you're making, it may not be the right choice.
Yeah,
there's just so many variables, and you think you're on the right path, and you've made the absolute wrong choice.
Yeah,
right. They lock dude in the cabin, and then that turns out to be the wrong choice because it was using that. Opportunity first to take him over, and then to start rebuilding ship and everything.
Exactly. Yeah.
So every turn. So yeah, by far that's my favorite. I don't, as much as I love John Carpenter, I think he peaked there. That was the best he's ever done, and I'd love to have seen someone else take that mantle and take it up. The sequel, and the weird thing is the sequel slash prequel, what they, where they presented it. Apparently, they originally were going to do it all in practical, and they built out a bunch of the creatures in practical, and then last minute decided to go all CGI. So I think it's called. Is it called Color of Space? It's a.
Oh, I might know.
Right, but they use, from what I'm understanding, the monsters, the creatures that they actually created for the Thing sequel, what they used for the special effects in that. So and those creatures were mostly practical, so that's where those came from.
Interesting.
So they repurposed the models that they weren't able to use for that sequel prequel.
Well, I mean, at least they got used.
Right. And so, and Nick Cage, I think the problem is that movie is underrated because Nick Cage is the star of it.
Yeah,
but
I've heard about this movie. I just haven't seen it. I know that it's like really trippy.
It's really trippy. So like you're talking about your animated one, this one is like, subject to interpretation. All right, so we did a lot on our intro part of it. So let's skip. We're not going to do movies and TVs today on our normal agenda, but let's do comics. Because we got to talk about the latest episode of The Boys, Gen V.
This, without a doubt, is probably my favorite episode so far. Just because you're seeing so many things come to a head.
Right.
Like, I guess what we could start kind of as a
spoiler warning, I guess, again.
Yeah, spoilers.
Most current content.
I guess like one of the first notes I wrote down. So what do you think is really going on with the whole Kate and Shetty thing? So like my theory is that Kate may quite possibly be faking Shetty's death. So what I think what might have been going on was because like you saw a huge transition in how they were acting with each other from the initial sequence of just Kate and her being together, and then when all of the friends show up and like they're like yelling at each other. And so what I think Shetty asked Kate to do was like, in realizing that she's kind of in a position where she's just fucked. Like no one's going to come and help her with this virus. She is really basically on her own now versus Vought and the boys, essentially, right? And so I think that she looked at it as my only way out of this is faking my death. So I'm going to have Kate convince a certain amount of people that I'm just dead.
Interesting.
And so that's why I think that there was such an intense shift between Shetty asking her, we have just one more push to do.
Right.
And then it transitioning to Kate yelling at her and like being just ultra pissed off. The thing about that though is that if that was really what happened, I struggle to think that Kate wouldn't have as much of a problem with Shetty spilling the beans completely like that as she did, unless that information was given to her when she was like previously told, you need to keep on wiping these people's memories, you need to like wipe all these people.
About the virus you're talking about?
Well, about the virus and the whole idea of like the school was there to study them, not that the school was there as an actual school.
School for them to study, yeah.
Yeah. But I don't know.
Yeah, see, I didn't interpret it quite the same way. That's food for thought. I guess maybe, what's his name? Kate's now ex-boyfriend, basically.
Golden Boy?
No, not Golden Boy, the other one. That's with his father right now in the hospital. Andre. So Andre didn't go, and I'm wondering, because they made a big deal out of Andre not going when Kate called. I'm wondering if that does feed into what you're saying, because then he wouldn't have seen everything that they saw.
Well, not only would he have maybe not seen everything, but in the whole idea of Shetty using a knife to cut her own throat, he could have pulled the knife away. Yeah. So like there's a bunch of different things like that where it's like, I feel like they set up that scenario perfectly.
Right, because he could have just went, and pulled the knife away.
And then thinking about the only person that was there that would have been able to save Shetty was Marie.
And she
then
stopped her.
All that Kate has to do is say, don't help.
Right.
And then it's like, well, Marie could just be looking at a vision of Shetty, and like, you know, especially with it being drawn in comparison to how her mom died, it's like that just feels a little bit too coincidental,
Right.
where it's like she's dying the exact same way, like, you know.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, I didn't think about it that way. Interesting. So based on your theory, then Shetty is still alive, so she is still the big bad of the season, because that's kind of what I was going to ask you, is like, who do you think's the big bad now?
Yeah,
you know, because Shetty's gone, and then what's his name, the scientist, that didn't go so well for him. She's like, is this all of it? Yep, that's all of it.
Yeah.
And he's like, well, oh, it's dry here.
The air must be a little dry. It's like, dude, your head's a little dry. That's what's going on. But and now the air's wet.
Yeah, it's not dry any longer.
But the thing that's interesting about that is, like, going into what you're talking about, is like, they have basically two directions to go, where, like, if my theory is correct, where Shetty is faking her own death, I have a feeling that we may not see Kate or Shetty at all in the finale. They may just try to escape, because Shetty was making it sound like she wanted to take care of Kate.
Right, they were going to go somewhere and hide, right?
But then
she was going to keep her safe, right?
Yeah, but then the other route they could take, where it's like, if Kate really did just do what we were shown, then I think Kate is the big bad.
So that's where I was going. That's where I was going, is that ultimately it was going to be Kate's now the big bad, and unfortunately they're going to have to try to stop Kate.
Yeah, and it's going to kind of be like a Soup Civil War sort of thing,
right? Where there's two sides, and there's Soups that feel that we just need to fight our way and destroy humanity if necessary, and Soups that feel we need to protect the people who. So, and that's going to put Kate and Marie on opposite sides, and that's what I was thinking they were setting up.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, it's like Kate went through the redemption arc, but now she's going to have to die anyway.
Well, yeah, and it's so sad too, because it's like you're seeing how these different perspectives can be just purely exploited, like how, you know, how they show the whole town hall sequence,
right?
And like you have Soups that, like, they haven't been shown or taught any better, and so they just believe that they are just a greater species. Like, they just believe that Homelander's right, and that, like, we should just be able to do whatever the fuck we want, because these humans are lesser than us.
Right. And they'll always just fear us, so we might as well just lean into it.
Exactly. One other really intriguing thing that I'm curious about, so they made it a point to show that Newman's powers work basically the exact same as Marie's powers do, where, like, she cuts her hand and then does
so it turns out that it's blood powers, and she thought she was the only one like that.
Yeah, and so not only does that really intrigue me in the sense of, okay, so now that we know that Newman and Marie essentially have the exact same power set, are we going to see Marie kind of like facilitate her powers more in a way that is almost like the good form of Newman, right?
Yeah.
Where, so, like, she's going down the path of, like, I just want to take care of things and get rid of them as quickly as possible by exploding people's heads.
Right.
But then with Marie, it could be a thing of, like, are we going to see, like, the reverse of that? Like, are we going to see her be able to, like, build organic matter back together, or, like, are we going to be able to see her? Are we going to be able to see her do, like, a different form of the head explosion thing? Because, like, one thing to think about is that when she exploded Rufus's dick, we saw it, like, kind of, like, blow up a bit before it exploded.
Didn't go, like, right away.
Exactly. It wasn't an
But
automatic
maybe
thing.
that, to your point, maybe it goes back to when they were in a nightclub, and Chicky got cut in the neck, and Marie, for the first time, used her powers to save somebody. So, you know, and then I think, was it with Kate? It was with Kate, with her heart. She did
restarted her heart.
Yeah. So I think you could be spot on that they're heading down this way. I don't know about rebuilding heads but at least
maybe not rebuilding heads.
Using her powers more to try to, again, to be the hero and help people and save people, rather than getting rid of obstacles by popping their heads.
Yeah, like rather than just cutting loose ends, like she's going to be trying to repair a lot of stuff.
Right.
And not only do I like that idea, but the one thing that was also intriguing is that before Cardosa died, he mentioned that the virus can only be transmitted through direct contact with bodily fluids.
Right.
Bodily fluid is blood. So could that possibly lead into Nguyen using blood powers to transmit?
And we're back again. So we have a physical limitation right now with our current equipment. So we ran out of time, but we're back again. So just to kind of wrap it up, so you were talking about Nguyen and Marie having the same powers, and kind of the parallel with Nguyen using her powers for bad, and Marie potentially using her powers for good. So I agree. I really see what you're saying there, and how it could go that way, because she's done it a few times where Marie's saved people using her blood powers, and we definitely know Nguyen likes to pop heads. So I agree with you there. But at any rate, we wanted to say happy Halloween, even though this will air the day after Halloween. That's a big day for us. Dante did a great job of decorating the front of the house with some bloody zombies and things like that.
They're all snowed out right now.
Right, they're all covered in snow. Otherwise, we'd show footage. But so maybe we'll by the time Halloween airs, we'll have some footage that we can show of that and everything. But thank you again, Dante. Again for working with me and doing this podcast. It's pretty cool.
Thank you for having me.
Okay. So thank you all for watching. And again, this is Mind the Nerdish Gap. So we'll see you next week.
Have a good one, everybody.
All right, bye.
Audio transmission now.
Orders, Commander.
How many times must I tell you? Mind the Nerdish Gap!